Good morning, everyone. This is JT Keating, the Vice President of Product Strategy for Zimperium. I would like to welcome you to another webinar. This is going to be the conclusion of our 7 deadly sins of mobile security. The whole concept behind this was we were talking to our customers, various different chief security officers around the world, and we were saying, kind of like, why did you invest in mobile security? What are you trying to protect? And more importantly, what are the downsides if people don't implement mobile security? And they came up with this list of things that were the risks inherent in not securing mobile endpoints. And then, of course, we decided to have some fun and put the title of the 7 deadly sins on top of it. So usual perfunctory stuff. We put a version of this up on the site within a day. We can make slides available to anybody. Standard form, we try to make this about 20-25 minutes of content so you guys can get back to your life, try and pack it in reasonably tightly. So if you have any questions at the end, then of course we'll field them. Please use the Q&A section. We don't use the chat session capability because it's a little wonky. So if you could, even if you have technical questions, throw it in the Q&A section. So with that, we are going to dive in. As we start this, one of the things I want to point out is we have literally tens of millions of endpoints around the world. We've collected billions and billions of data points. We literally have one of the best, not one of, the best mobile threat research team on the planet. They get accolades from everybody. They get awards from everybody. More importantly, they are the group that have actually put in as many more vulnerabilities that have been patched by Apple and Android than all of our competitors combined times 10. So these guys are wicked smart. I just want to give them a little bit of a shout out. And a lot of the stuff that we're going to dive into are directly result of the work that they do. So let's dive into the deadly sin of opening the corporate network with a mobile device. Before we do, I always like to level set. If you've heard some of these webinars before, you've heard this before, but I think it's really, really important if you haven't. And that is simply this. 100% of our customers have detected mobile threats. 100% worldwide, when they implement mobile security, they are detecting threats. So it's important to know that it is a very, very real threat. And so the idea and the potential of what we're going to talk about how you can come in, take over a mobile device, and how that can actually lead to a complete breach and complete compromise of your network is a very, very real phenomenon. A very key point that is now fully being understood by everybody is simply that mobile is another endpoint. If you've got patient data sitting on a laptop, it's no different than if you got it sitting on a server. It's no different than you got it sitting on a tablet. So if a doctor's got that on a tablet, you need to secure that just as much as you would a laptop or a server in that particular scenario. One of the things that always gets kind of the attention and makes our cybersecurity guys writhe on their seats a little bit is this fact. Of all the investments we've made in mobile security, we're protecting 40% of the endpoints according to current studies. 40% of the endpoints are traditional endpoints of laptop servers, et cetera. 60% are mobile. So 40% is where we've put our investment, and we have visibility, great, ability to see and fight threats. 60%, the mobile side, are completely exposed. And I like to talk about the fact that there are some time-tested laws of security. I've been in cybersecurity for quite some time, and these laws always apply. The first one is land and expand. The bad guys have a business model. They're not trying to prove that they're the coolest, most wicked hackers on the planet anymore. Those days are gone. They want to find the weakest link into an enterprise and make their way in. Well, mobile has access to almost all the same resources, and usually does have access to the same resources. It spends 80% of its time outside of our protected network. And the 40% over here, I was talking about endpoint security, but they're also inside all the network security. Mobile devices are outside of that. And then the reality is the user is the admin. So the person that usually makes the most mistakes in security is the one that takes this device outside of our protected network, has no protection on it, has no visibility on it. It's exactly where the bad guys are going. We're going to continue to to talk about that because there's no protection. So they're going to land there and they're going to expand in, which is some of the stuff we're going to be talking about here. So it is important to know, though, that mobile attacks are different than traditional. Traditional endpoints, apps could play with other apps, which is the reason we have the term malware, where software, right? So an app could come in and go sideways across the device in order to compromise it and to be persistent. On mobile, all apps are in what are called containers. Each app is in its own little bucket, and apps are not allowed to play with other apps unless they have elevated privilege, like being an MDM or a VPN. And we'll talk about those here in a quick second. But since apps can't jack with other apps, but the second law of security that is so important is persistence. The bad guys want, for as long as they've been doing this, once they take over an asset, they want to remain persistent as long as possible on that device, server, laptop, point of sale, doesn't matter, so that they can continue their land and expanding. They don't want to just grab it and leave it, right? They want to stay persistent. Well, since all apps are in containers on mobile, that you can't be persistent and take over the entire device unless you go all the way over and compromise the actual device. Sometimes I put up a ship of a picture of a container ship. You got all the different containers and then you got the ship, right? Mobile apps are those containers. So malicious apps, we've been doing this, like I said, again, Sears accolades to our threat research guys, billions of data points coming across. And we know for a fact that almost all mobile malware is designed for fraud. It can deliver an exploit, but it's really untargeted and designed for consumer fraud, click fraud, ad fraud, banking fraud, etc. Mobile phishing is the next kind of step up, and it's more risky to an enterprise than mobile apps are because first of all, 90% of breaches begin with a phishing attack. 2/3 of emails are being read on mobile. It is much easier to actually trick somebody into clicking on a link on mobile than it is on a traditional endpoint because the form factor. It's easier to get away with things. So, but the minute you hit a web page and the browser processes that web page, an exploit can be delivered. So phishing is still untargeted in terms of from a corporate standpoint. Again, really about fraud and credential stealing and things, but it can deliver an exploit. What we've seen, though, is we knew from the very beginning, Zimperium's been built from the very beginning to protect enterprises against targeted attacks. And so we know that the bad guys are bad dudes, but they're really good at what they do. I'm not going to give them accolades, though. I'm only going to keep the accolades for the threat research guys here. But they are very good at what they do. They're not going to drop an app in the App Store. If they're targeting XYZ Bank, for instance, they're not going to drop an app in the App Store and hope somebody from XYZ Bank downloads that. It's a bad business model. What they're going to do is they're actually going to set up a fake Wi-Fi network or do a man-in-the-middle attack at a coffee shop right across from XYZ's headquarters until they find somebody. In fact, our data has shown 90% of targeted attacks begin with the bad guys owning the network, begin with a network attack because it's efficient. I put it up, I set it up, I wait until I find somebody from XYZ, bang, I compromise the device. So again, the ultimate objective, the only way you can actually take over that device, be persistent, and continue then to utilize it as an asset is to actually compromise the device. Gain root access, elevate privilege with a malicious profile on iOS, for instance, but something to actually take over that device. So what we're talking about now is, okay, somebody takes over a mobile device. So what? It's just a mobile device. Maybe it just has access to email, a couple things, but how big of a deal can it really be, right? When it comes to compromising the network itself. Well, if you have been around for a little while, we've done a couple webinars, and I like to always start with thinking about the person that's trying to do this. In this case, the bad guys, the hackers, and saying, okay, what exactly do they want? And why would they want our employees' mobile devices? Well, there's really three primary goals, right? I want to steal credentials so I can use them later. I don't want to just steal credentials and not use them, obviously. I want to actually take data. There's a whole bunch of data sitting on mobile devices. A lot of people don't know, if you listen to our webinar on the deadly sin of not securing email, all of the attachments of your email, corporate email or personal, but all of your attachments of your email are in one folder on your mobile device. So think about every attachment you've ever had, or think about all the emails you've actually had, for instance, that are sitting there on your device. But then there's weaponization. And for this conversation, the whole conversation about, okay, what's the danger of this actually going into the network? The weaponization part is the key. And again, that is directly correlated with, I have to be persistent. I have to have compromised the device. I have to own that device. If I'm still in a little app container, like, just typical mobile malware, that's not going to get the job done. I need to own the device. And the interesting thing is, if you've seen the demos we've done, for instance, in the email one I mentioned, or the ransomware, you see that when a bad guy gains access to our device, they don't have as much capabilities on the device as we do. They have way more capabilities than we do. They have root access, for instance. They can do anything. They have all the encryption keys. They can do anything they want with this device. So the bad guys take over the device, almost always starting 90% of the time, starting with a network attack, which means bad guys own the network. We will come back to that in a second. Okay, so now they own the device and they have the ability to do these three different things. Well, when it comes to the corporate network, what are the, how do these devices actually expose the networks? Now, for you folks that sat through the ransomware webinar, these are the same three things. These are the same three things of how can I deliver ransomware is also the same way that I can actually penetrate into the network. In the ransomware case, I'm going to do some of these things to actually find and find the devices that are susceptible, let's say, to WannaCry, and deliver it. But it's the same thing. What I'm doing is I'm coming in, I'm trying to use this mobile device to get inside the corporate network and then get to the other devices inside the corporate network. So the three approaches, the pivot, the sniff, and the spearfish. We're going to kind of run through each one of these. So the pivot. We did a webinar with a super smart white hat hacker, penetration tester that was hired by a financial firm in Europe. And the ask was very simple. We want you to exfiltrate some data. The only thing is it has to start with an employee. So that was the whole ask. Let's see what we can do. So, of course, they did the logical thing. 90% of breaches start with a phishing attack. We are going to phish. So they sent phishing emails. Failed miserably. Found out afterwards that they were set up, basically. They had done the entire corporate training on phishing the week before. So, failed miserably. Well, they noticed when they were waiting for the meeting, the gent we did the interview with, or the webinar with, and his partner, they were sitting in the lobby, and they noticed there was a lot more devices connected because they were sniffing the Wi-Fi network. There was a lot more devices connected to the guest network than there were people in the lobby. So they very quickly figured out that employees were using the guest network because it had less restrictions on it to be able to get out to the real world, which means they were susceptible, right? We always talk about the fact that the single biggest risk in an enterprise has always been a carbon-based life form. It's always been a person, and this was absolutely the case. They chatted with the receptionist, found out that the receptionist had a child that had some attention issues, and loved playing puzzles, and helped her daughter calm down. So, unbeknownst to her, she got tricked into installing a puzzle game. Inside the puzzle game was malicious software in this particular case. They were able to use that to gain access to that. She was on the guest network, but then she also went on the corporate network. When she got on the corporate network, they were able to hop off and expand out, move laterally until ultimately they had what's called the golden ticket. They had actually elevated privileges all the way up to being the domain admin, all starting with an Android phone. So that's the idea of a pivot. It literally is, I'm going to take advantage of this, and then when that walks in, I'm going to try and hop off and capitalize on some others. The next one is similar to it. It's one potential way of beginning the pivot, which is different than the technical way that this one was done here. And that is the sniff. There's a bunch of Android malware, and I'm even going to point out who's making a lot of this malware in the next slide. But there's a bunch of Android-based malware that as soon as the device gets on a Wi-Fi network, it sniffs for all the other Windows and Linux-based systems that are on that same Wi-Fi network. It's possible that the hackers, the white hat hackers in the last one, used technology like this with the receptionist phone when she walked in. I don't remember asking him about it. I'll have to go back and ask him. Thank you for reminding me about that. So we talked about this in the ransomware. One scenario is you come in, you start sniffing around for all these devices that are susceptible to WannaCry, for instance. We've seen that. So that's in the case of delivering ransomware, but it's the same thing here. You can come in, you can sniff, you do a scan of what's on this, and then say, okay, now which one of these devices around me is eligible or exploitable via other techniques, and then use this phone and hop over to them, and now you're inside the network, and you can start going sideways. I mentioned that we're going to talk a little bit about kind of who does this. You can see here, for those of you folks that aren't familiar with the Lazarus Group, Lazarus Group is the North Korean-backed hacker army, and they are dangerously good. And they are, for instance, the ones that people say are behind WannaCry. They're the ones who took down Sony after the interview. And you can see here, they're doing Android-based malware. I mentioned the ransomware, especially again, assuming that all the information is correct and they are behind WannaCry. We've seen a lot of Android malware that the first thing it does is sniff for devices that are susceptible to WannaCry. So it makes sense that all these things kind of fit together. In that case, again, deliver ransomware, but it could just as easily be to expand further into the environment. So we did the pivot, we did the sniff, and then the last one, which we actually did a demo on, you can go back and watch the email on the 7 deadly sins of not securing email on mobile, is a spear phish. Once I take over a device, let's say I took over the device of the CEO, for instance, I can send emails, I can send texts, I basically am the CEO at that point in time. So once I have that capability, I can actually send emails in that include exploits. Now I'm sending emails into somebody. You can exfiltrate data directly back out, which obviously is part of the spear phish. I'm the CEO. Hey, send me the earnings announcements, will you? But at the same time, I can actually use that as an entry vehicle where I can deliver malware inside of the environment to actually compromise those devices of the people that are opening those devices inside the corporate network. It's not as clean and clear as the other ones probably, because again, 40% of those devices have endpoint security. So now you have to kind of bank on the fact that maybe the security is not that good on those endpoints, but it's still a real possibility. So the simple fact is, these devices that have no protection on them, that spend all the time outside the network, that have users as the admin, are easy pickings that somebody can then use and walk back into the environment. And once it walks back into the environment, spread throughout the network. So what can we do to stop this? These webinars are never intended to be like a big product pitch, but it is always good to kind of say, all right, well, you just told me that there's this horrific problem. Please tell me there's something we can do about it. And the short answer is yes, there is. I'm going to start back on something I said a little while ago. I'm not going to repeat all these different threats, but what I am going to do is focus on the 90%. As we said, in mobile, 90% of the attacks begin with a network attack because that's the easiest, fastest, most efficient way for these guys running their business to target a company. What that means in the context of the solution is you have to assume the bad guy owns the network 9 times out of 10. On a targeted attack, if you're producing consumer security and you're just trying to protect consumers against fraud, yeah, fine, go play the malware thing. We do all 4, by the way, but we knew the bad guys were going to control the network 9 times out of 10 for a targeted attack because we're the enterprise guys. So what we knew is you can't go to the cloud for your detection. You have to be able to do 100% of your detection on device. Otherwise, the first thing the bad guy does is cut off any access to any cloud-based detection service. So we knew it. Gartner and company are now catching up to it, right? So here's one of the most recent Gartner reports. And you can see the on-device agent provides a better likelihood of the protection persisting over a compromised network. That's about as close to a definitive statement as you will get from Gartner when it comes to a particular approach. When we spend a lot of time with the Gartner guys and we say, okay, what happens if the bad guy controls the network and all my detection is in the cloud? And they say, well, pretty much vanishes. And we're more than happy to connect anybody with any of the Gartner analysts that can help with that. So we have one core engine that does exactly that. It does zero-day detection of threats on device attacks, network attacks, phishing, and malicious apps. So we've got these students, and it's called Z9. And Z9 can be rolled out in one of two ways. If you're trying to protect the device 100% of the time and all the data that's on the device, use a product called ZIPS, which stands for Z Intrusion Prevention System. It is next generation endpoint security for mobile. So it's literally EPP, if you use the Gartner terminology, for mobile, right? And so in all these scenarios where we're talking about compromising a device and then pivoting in, this is the protection against that as a general rule. If, however, you have mobile apps, maybe you have mobile apps that you're using for external customers, or maybe even internally because you got some BYOD scenarios and you don't want to roll out a full MDM for some of those. We have a product called Z-App, which is an SDK. You can drop Z9 directly inside that mobile app in a matter of minutes, and you can detect all the same threats. But in that case, you're not trying to protect the device 100% of the time. You're trying to protect the session and the app itself, right? Both of those come into our Z console, cloud-based console. Another huge advantage of doing everything on device, and because we're the enterprise guys, we always believe that we should fit into your world, not the other way around. Z console can be on any cloud. Folks that are doing cloud-based detection are locked into one solution. They're all AWS. AWS is great for us, but if you're Google, if you're Azure, if you're Oracle Cloud, we don't care. We can also do on-prem because we're doing all our detection on there, which is big, especially in federal governments and places like that. Behind Z console is a capability called Z3A. There's risks and there's threats. Threats, mobile threats, malware threats are detected by Z9. App risks, are there apps in your environment sitting on your employees' devices that are inherently bring additional security or privacy risks? They can be perfectly legitimate apps, but because the developers are running around trying to get these things out as quickly as possible, they might either on purpose or inadvertently dropped in a library that sends traffic to a foreign country, that decrypts traffic. All sorts of other potential security and privacy risks are inside those apps. Z3A will tell you all of that information, so you can set policies, say, hey, look, any app that's sending traffic to Russia or China, no, I just don't want it, right? It's just not going to be in my environment, right? Behind Z console, we integrate in with the largest number of EMMs. We're also the only ones who can handle multiple EMMs in a single tenant, which is huge because we have a lot of guys that are on one and are transitioning to another, or inherited a couple and nobody wants to get rid of either one of them. It doesn't matter. We can protect them all. We've also taken our agent, and if you're a Mobile Iron customer, Mobile Iron has actually integrated Z-App directly into the Mobile Iron agent. So in that case, you push a button, you basically say, yeah, I want that. And you have 100% coverage. Users don't even know it's there, 100% visibility, and on-device detection and remediation right then and there. So that's pretty cool. And then as the enterprise guys, forensics, the data, what are you going to do with it? How does it fit in? We integrate in with a huge number of SIM products. We have a relationship with McAfee on the EPO side. And then Splunk, we got a Splunk app in their store, and we can continue to expand more and more out. So with that, what I'm going to do is thank you very much for your time. I'm going to stop and see if we have any questions. And then if not, I will make sure to give you some of your time back. So I don't see any questions, but what I would suggest is please follow us on Twitter or LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever your preference happens to be. We like to put a lot of information out. I also promise you it's not all marketing stuff. As I mentioned about the mobile security guys, we do a lot of blogs, CVE coverage, things on those lines. So please follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, etc. And please make sure and come back and check us out for some webinars. The next set of series we're going to be doing on the webinars is actually on mobile compliance. As we pointed out, and as everybody is really understanding, an endpoint is an endpoint is an endpoint. So all these different compliance mandates, PCI, HIPAA, NERC, GDPR, NDB, all those, they have requirements for securing endpoints. So we're actually going to talk specifically about each one. So if you deal with PCI, check out that webinar, HIPAA, NERC, etc. So with that, I would like to thank everybody. I hope you have a fantastic day and I hope this has been helpful. Thank you very much.